I'm trying to improve my digital art skills, so I'm doing studies of some older art. Today I'm trying to draw Rosalba Carriera's A Young Lady with a Parrot, which Carriera drew around 1730. This pastel work is currently in the possession of the Art Institute of Chicago, and according to their website, is in Gallery 216 at time recording, if you want to check it out in person. I'll put the original work I'm referencing in the corner of the screen periodically so you can see and compare while I work. I'm mostly trying to use pens and brushes labeled as like pastel or chalk in Clip Studio to try and let it have some of the texture and feel more organic and hopefully closer to the traditional art. I also toggled on perceptual color mixing in Clip Studio because for the life of me I cannot figure out how standard color mixing works in digital art. I know it has to do with additive matrices and RGB. It's a lot more on-the-fly math than pigment color mixing, so I haven't figured out the shortcuts to the standard digital color mix while avoiding the unwanted grays. A little bit about Rosalba Carriera herself, because I need something to talk about while you watch the process, and we might as well learn a little about the original artist. I'll toss up a self-portrait she did in another corner briefly so you know how she perceived herself. Born in 1673 as the eldest of three girls, daughter to a minor Venetian public official, Rosalba Carriera got her artistic start painting miniatures in the inside of snuff boxes and creating patterns for her mother, who worked as a lace maker. Both crafts, which were viewed as more feminine, however, the painted miniature portraits allowed her to make a living by 1700 when she was in her mid-20s. What Rosalba Carriera would become known for, however, was her pastel portraiture, particularly of French nobility. Although black and red pastels had been used for centuries for sketching, the colorful pastels needed to make a realistic scene didn't become available till the late 15th century. These new pastels would be looked down on and not deemed as high in art as oil painting, with the primary market for pastels being copyists, as some people would pay to see a copy of an oil painting, and pastels were faster to do than an oil study of a painting. They were also used by students when studying. By the late 1600s, a change had occurred because in France, Rococo was all the rage, and pastels were really good at the Rococo style, and with its faster production time, artists could have a lot of clients and do repeat works as the rich emulated trends in fashion. Rosalba Carriera had refined her pastel portraiture, which she had started selling in 1703 at 30 years old. She would train both her younger sisters in the pastel portraiture. Angela would go on to marry a painter, and Giovanna would become Rosalba's assistant, with most of her known contributions being the backgrounds and draperies of their work. In 1719, after her father died, she traveled to Paris, where her art was well received at the age of 46. Carriera was commissioned to draw Louis XV, a 10-year-old prince at the time, and made enough of an impact that the French nobility could not get enough of her work, and she inspired many more French artists to draw in a similar style. Rosalba was granted honorary membership to the Académie Royale in Paris, as the 1706 ruling prevented any more full women memberships at the time, and was elected to the Académie Sainte Clementina at Bologna, as well as the academies of St. Luke in Rome, Bologna, and Florence. She and her sisters traveled Europe to meet their royal and noble and rich patrons. Duke Casimir III de' Medici added her self-portrait to his personal collection. The sisters were known to be able to capture a sitter's personality and the fluffy fashions of the time while hiding the physical flaws. Sadly, towards the end of her life, after the 1737 death of her sister Giovanna and the late 1740s loss of her eyesight, Rosalba would fall into periods of depression. She would die in 1757 at 84 years old. The French Revolution would later shun ties to the times of Louis XIV, and then the rise of neoclassicism as an art form would cause Rococo to fall out of favor, and Rosalba Carriera would become less well known and forgotten by many. This would be further compounded by the fact later in time Rococo would be associated with femininity. As for my study, I think sticking to a single layer really helped the chalk and pastel brushes to behave more like real life chalk and pastel. However, I think maybe I should have started with an artist who was not a portrait person because I've been doing a lot of other portrait videos. But on the other hand, I really do need to work on my portrait skills, and that's part of the reason that I've been doing so many portraits on this channel, is just because I need to get better at drawing people's faces. I think that my colors turned out slightly different than the way I wanted to, but I will work on that in the future. But it is done. I hope you learned a little bit about Rosalba. In the meantime, this series will be back eventually with some other different study, probably learning about and from someone else. But until then, bye!